I believe that digital education is the reset button of the global economy. I believe that digital education has the potential to create wealth like many industrial or technological revolution have done before, but at a bigger scale. I believe that digital education is a bit like our new oil, the new oil of our knowledge economy. And let me tell you why I think this. And to understand this, let's look at the impact of technology on what we call the 21st century skills and the 21st century education. Let me start with the questions. Will the future need us? I know it's a very philosophical question, but let me tell you where I'm going with this. We've all heard about Google self-driving cars. We all heard about Uber. Will that replace drivers and chauffeurs? Yes. The question is yes, it's already happening. That's a very low-skilled job. Now let's move to the other end of the spectrum. Will artificial intelligence replace scientists? It's already happening. You have here a picture of IBM Watson, which is a computer which can analyze hundreds of thousands of cancer research reports in a couple of seconds. It will take 37 years for a cancer researcher to do the same job. We're talking here about a very highly skilled job. So what's new here? Technology has always replaced jobs from one sector to another, so nothing is new. But what is very new is that this is happening across all sectors of the economy at an exponential speed and at an exponential scale. Not only low-skilled jobs are at threat, but we're also talking about doctors, traders, journalists, scientists. All of them are currently being made obsolete much more quicker than what you think. And there is actually a study that's been published looking at the probability that computerization will lead to job losses. And what you can see is that there are certain jobs that are protected and certain jobs that are not protected and very exposed to the impact of technology. And the bottom line of this survey, of this research, is that unless you are a therapist, a dentist, or the Pope, I can see clergy, you're basically at risk of being replaced. And there is a couple of low-skilled jobs here, but if you look at, for example, CEOs, they will have a probability of 0.5 to be replaced by computer, which is quite a striking thought here. So my point here is that lifelong learning, perpetual retraining, will soon become a necessity for all of us and will soon become the oil to power our knowledge economy. And the question of this is then, what's the impact on education? Think of it. As teachers, educators, how do you educate children in a world where actually the value of knowledge and the value of skills will depreciate much quicker? You might be the best teacher. You can't prepare youth, you can't retrain workforce for skills that do not exist yet, even if you're the best teacher in the world. So currently, I would say that education, as an institution which is responsible for the lifelong transfer of knowledge and training, is actually an outdated technology. And what we need to rethink about is what's the role of the three pillars of education: content, methodology, teachers. We have good teachers, there is good content, there is probably good methodology, but systemically, it doesn't really work anymore. And I think the debate about digital education is too much about let's bring tablets and mobile phones in the classroom, let's digitize textbook, but that's not the right debate. The debate about education technology is how technology is the best possible answer or response to the accelerated obsolescence of skills and knowledge. And the time to think about it is now, because there is actually a form of urgency. There is urgency because there is a giant skill and talent gap looming on the global economy. There is one number that I think is very telling. 36% of employers cannot find the skills they need. 36% of employees have jobs for which they feel overqualified. And these two gaps are actually representing a huge waste of money. If you think of it, every year, $4.3 trillion is spent globally on education. That represents the equivalent of 50% of the GDP of China. And what this is telling us is that actually, for a third of the beneficiary, this money is just a waste, because it doesn't deliver on preparing new generation to get a jobs or to get skills that will get them a jobs, and it doesn't even get employees jobs that are fulfilling. So that's probably a good way to measure ultimately the efficiency of our education system. And if you link that number to another number that I think is very telling, is that 90% of the world population under 30 years old lives in emerging markets. So this generation, we will represent in the next 20 years the essential part of the active population of the world, which is roughly 50% of the world GDP, needs to have the right skills. Because what if the skills of these generations are not fit for businesses? What if those skills are not marketable? What does that mean? Well, that means a huge crisis of skills and talent, and potentially having a generation that cannot access the job market because of not the right skills. That could be much more damaging than any financial crisis or even oil crisis we've known in the past. So the question is, why is that education in its current form is totally unable to respond dynamically to skill gaps and talent gaps? And I think it's very simple. The cost of deploying and disseminating education is too expensive, and it's also too rigid to do it. 85% of the $4.3 trillion spent on education are actually linked to the delivery of education, teachers and infrastructures, 85% of it. So for an education system to adjust to the challenge of perpetual retraining or lifelong learning, things need to change. Education needs to be fluid, fast, flexible, skill-focused, and ubiquitous to learners and workers globally. And this is why digital education is a necessity, and this is why there is a systemic change that needs to happen. Now, going beyond this, going beyond education, now, how each nation is handling its digital transition will probably determine ultimately where it will rank in the global economic order. And the big prize at stake for those nations is what I call the education super dividend. It is actually quite hard to measure, but there is a study from OECD that shows that for every increase of 25 points in PISA points, you can generate over, I think, 90 years, an increase in GDP of 100,000 USD per capita. That's the education super dividend. And to put things in context, that would mean bringing France and UK to the level of Finland in terms of PISA score. Now, let's think about the future economic order in the next 20 years. Which nation do you think is the best position to take advantage of what education technology has to offer? Is it incumbent nation, developed markets, or is it what I call startups nations, emerging markets? Well, I have an answer for this. In my view, emerging markets have 4 unmatchable competitive advantages to take advantage of digital education. First, they will be soon have what I call a digital supremacy. 60% of the global digital universe by 2017 will be populations in emerging markets. Second, they have the youth supremacy. 90% of the world population lives in emerging markets. They have a young population that is much eager to train and retrain. Third, There is something that we can smell, we can feel when we go in emerging markets, which is a learn to earn hunger, fueled by economic development. There is a huge growth opportunity, an increase of $30 trillion in consumer spend by 2025. That's the biggest economic growth opportunity in capitalism history. And that drives population to learn new skills to access the job market. So, in my view, digital education is indeed the reset button of the global economy. Yet, digital education is largely, compared to the size of the sector, underinvested. Less so in the US, a little bit in Asia, very much in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Digital education is underinvested. And that's underinvesting in the future of the nation and the future of generation. So, let's be bold. Let's press that button, because it would be a very, very wise thing to do. Thank you very much.